Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment and audiobooks, ranging from bestsellers to celebrity memoirs, news, business, and self-development. Every month, members get 1 credit to pick any title, plus 2 Audible originals from a monthly selection, and access to daily news digests from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, as well as guided meditation programs. Between a full-time job in IT and a full-time job in podcasting, it gets harder and harder to sit down and read the books I'm interested in. This is where Audible comes in. I can listen on my daily commute, relaxing, or while out running errands and still get in the books I've been wanting to get into. You can download titles and listen offline anytime, anywhere. The app is free and can be installed on all smartphones and tablets. Now you can try Audible risk-free with a special 30-day free trial by visiting audibletrial.com/nerdery and murdery. That's audibletrial.com/nerdery and murdery. Don't let your busy life get in the way of that great book you've been wanting to read. Go get your free trial of Audible today. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. This is Geoffrey, and we've talked about many times before that I experience problems and struggles with my mental health, and really without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is therapy does work. It's helped for me, but what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships at work, or you're not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's really time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles, and it's time to start feeling better because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in-person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is a customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. So join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are your greatest asset. And there's a special offer to Nerdery and Murdery listeners. You can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/nerdery and murdery. That's betterhelp.com/nerdery and murdery. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast.
You're listening to the sweet sounds of Nerdery and Murdery.
You're an idiot. Welcome to episode 62 of Nerdery and Murdery.
62. I'm Zig with your Nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your Murdery. Welcome to another week of the ups and the downs and the nerdery, the murdery, the hijinks, the low jinks. And so with that, I will turn it over to Zig for the hijinks portion of our show.
Why, thank you, sir. I actually want to start out by giving a little shout out. As of the time we're recording this, it is Lorelei's 8th birthday. So happy birthday to Lorelei. We're going to get into some shenanigans when I get home today. So.
Awesome.
Today, we are going to talk about Steve Jackson games.
Which we've talked a little bit about him before because we did GURPS.
Yes.
So we have talked a little bit about Steve Jackson.
I kind of felt like GURPS needed to be an episode by itself.
Sure.
But there are also several things that Steve Jackson did in the interim that we really, I think, bear talking about as well.
Yeah,
so,
sure. No, don't disagree.
We may touch on GURPS, but just as, from a standpoint of where it sits in the company.
Yeah.
I need to give a retraction as well. The Robotech book that I used to fawn over that Don had that I read cover to cover wasn't the Steve Jackson version of Macross. It was actually the Palladium Games one. I had to get a correction from Don. He's like, I never had that book. This is the Palladium Games one that you used to read all the time. I'm like, okay, so Steve Jackson Games is a game company founded in 1980 by Steve Jackson, that creates and publishes role-playing, board, and card games, and until 2019, the gaming magazine Pyramid. So, which amazes me that we actually had a magazine that lasted that long.
Right.
And Pyramid is basically based on one of the games they did called the Illuminati, which they republish every few years. And it's been going since, I believe, 1983.
Yeah, I've got a copy of the Illuminati.
It's a lot of fun. It's a game where you where you play a secret society trying to take over the world, and you arrange these cards out in a very complex Venn diagram in front of you, trying to beat the other players. Where you are encouraged to cheat. But it was the company itself was founded in 1980, 6 years after the creation of Dungeons and Dragons. SG Games, or Steve Jackson Games, created several role-playing and strategy games with science fiction themes. SG Games' early titles were micro games, initially sold in 4x7-inch Ziploc bags and later in the similarly sized pocket box. Games such as Ogre, Car Wars, and GEV, which was an Ogre spinoff, were popular during the Steve Jackson Games' early years. Game designers such as Lauren Weissman and Jonathan Lasitko have worked for Steve Jackson Games on and off for, since the 1980s.
Keith and I used to play Ogre. That is a hard game. Not necessarily a hard game to learn how to play, but it's a hard game to play if you're not the Ogre.
Easy to learn, hard to master.
Yes. I mean, the Ogre is this big old, massive, almost indestructible war tank. And you have two players, one that plays the Ogre, one that plays all the other armies going up against the Ogre.
Everybody else trying to kill the Ogre.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's difficult.
Very.
Now, today, Steve Jackson Game publishes a variety of games such as card games, board games, strategy games, and in different genres such as fantasy, sci-fi, and gothic horror. They also published the book Principia Discordia, the Sacred Text of the Discordian Religion, which I think goes back to their Cthulhu game. On March 1st, 1990, the Secret Service raided the offices of Steve Jackson Games, seizing 3 computers, 2 laser printers, dozens of floppy disks, and the master copy of GURPS Cyberpunk, a genre toolkit for cyberpunk games, written by Lloyd Blankenship, the hacker and an employee at the time. The Secret Service believed that Blankenship had illegally accessed Bell South's systems and uploaded a document possibly affecting 911 systems onto Steve Jackson's game's public bulletin board system. And furthermore, the GURPS Cyberpunk would help others commit computer crimes. During the investigation, the Secret Service also read and deleted private emails on one of the computers, though the material was later returned in June. Steve Jackson Games filed suit in federal court, winning at trial. The raid led to the formation of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which was founded in July of 1990. And let me say this, folks. In the community, the nerd or geeky community, this actually helped Steve Jackson Games sales. They couldn't publish for about 6 months, but boy, when they could, people bought their stuff all across the board. They also have it was a bulletin board. It's an older website now, and it reads like an older website. But you can go to Steve Jackson Games' website and see everything they have ever published, which is 1,500 games or modules at this point. Yeah. Take your time, because it's about 50 pages. They publish games, books, and other entertainment and information, both on paper and online. They're known for Munchkin, Zombie Dice, the aforementioned Ogre, Shea Geek, GURPS, which we've talked about, Car Wars, The Fantasy Trip, and Illuminati, which we discussed. The company was founded in 1980 by Steve Jackson's. He did his first game design working for Metagaming starting in 1977. In 1980, he bought Space Gamer from Metagaming and went into business for himself. 3 games and 1 set of Cardboard Heroes figures were released in late 1980. The new company really took off in 1981 when Car Wars hit the store. So what Car Wars is, for the uninitiated, there are 2 versions of this game. One is a card game, which you could sit around and play with your friends, which is a lot of fun. We play a lot. Mm-hmm. where you basically have these cars and they have to fight each other and you draw for bullets and things like that. The other game is a role-playing game where you basically design a car with weapons and backup systems, and you carry it to these places where you have these battles inside an arena known as Car Wars.
There was a video game adaptation too.
There was!
Commodore 64, I believe.
Yeah, I forgot about that. I wonder if that's on the new Commodore 64.
Could be.
That would be nice to see, because I'd like to play that again and Leather Goddess of Phobos again, because I haven't played that in a while. I know you can upload the new mini C64 and C64, the VIC-20, and they finally released an Amiga, that company. So you can actually play Amiga 500 games as well. On, I don't want to say original hardware, because it's not. It's emulated. Right. But you can play those old games, and in the Commodore cases, you can actually do programming and program your own games or upload games in the old Commodore operating system, which is amazing.
Yeah, I played the Car Wars video game quite a bit. It was difficult, but it was fun, and the Car Wars card game, but never the role-playing game.
Was the game text-based or?
No, it was graphic.
Okay.
It was graphics. I mean, it was Commodore 64 graphics, but it was graphics.
I don't think I've ever played it. I've heard about it.
No, it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Nice. Yeah, the only person I know who's actually played the role-playing game is Don. Mm-hmm. I don't know. He was playing it quite a bit when he was back east. Steve Jackson Games is actually doing quite well now. They're somewhere north of 30 employees and contractors, plus a number of part-time staff. And so on. In terms of sales, they're sometimes in the top 10 adventure game companies, but depending on what you call an adventure game company, not in the top 5. A lot of this I cribbed from their website. They're pretty open and honest about their methodology. Even the Secret Service rating their company.
I can't remember. Was Mag Blast a Steve Jackson Games too?
I believe so. I think Mag Blast was
another
also
great card game.
Yeah. When it came out, Mag Blast came out, and then Munchkin came out shortly after.
Right.
Munchkin, I think, is their biggest seller right now. Because
it's got lots of iterations.
Yeah, there's lots of iterations of it. Basically, what Munchkin is it's a card game based around a dungeoning adventure party, and how players would munchkin their characters. And by munchkining, what that means is you develop your characters in such a way where they're unbeatable. So you've got weird things in Munchkin, like the bandana of badassness, or badass bandana, the dirty bastard sword, the bottle.
Mag Blast, by the way, was Fantasy Flight Games.
Oh, Mag Blast was Fantasy Flight?
Yep.
That's the least intricate game I've ever seen by them. Because usually they design little pieces. That's just card stock. So as I said, they were Steve Jackson's has published 1,500 games, expansions, and accessories, books, toys, and other unclassifiable items. For a current listing, you can go to their website on their R Games page for a complete list. And it's, again, titled everything that they've ever released, including how to get it. Even some of the stuff that's not published, they'll give you links on where you can find it. They describe Munchkin as a dungeon crawling without the annoying role-playing junk in the form of a card game. It's fun, it's funny, and it's their top seller. It spawned 2 board games, Munchkin Quest and Munchkin Treasure Hunt, and started a crossover to other games. Munchkin Panic, Munchkin Loot Letter, and Munchkin Gloom. They've even invaded TV shows: Munchkin Adventure Time, Munchkin Rick and Morty, Munchkin The Nightmare Before Christmas, and comics: Munchkin Marvel Edition, Munchkin X-Men Edition, and there's more to come from Munchkin. Until, as Steve Jackson likes to put it, until Munchkin takes over the world. Now there's actually a Munchkin collectible card game as well, and a console game for Asmodee, inspired by Munchkin, whatever Asmodee is. And again, we talked about GURPS. GURPS stands for Generic Universal Role Playing System. They have published 400 different books and supplements for GURPS. And they have a character design program called GURPS Character Assistant for 4th edition. And you can go to the More About GURPS page again on their website. Ogre was Steve Jackson's first game. Originally published in 1977, it's a future war game in which one side has a single giant robot tank, the Ogre, and the other has forces of infantry and armor. The Ogre's goal is to destroy the enemy command post, while the defender's goal is to preserve it, regardless of losses. Ogre has been released in a number of versions, including miniature rules. The current version of Ogre is in the 6th edition. Plastic miniatures have been released, and more sets are coming. Computer game from Orochi Digital is now on Steam, so you can go and play it if you want to play it again. And they're continuing to release scenarios and the Ogre support. They also have another card game called Shay Geek, which is basically I don't know if I'm going to say it's a send-up of fanboys, but it's kind of a fanboy geek, a fanboy, I guess, poking fun at us as fanboys. But basically, the idea is you want to be able to sit around and play games all day as opposed to going to work. So you get these things called Slack points. I think you've got a copy of Shay Geek, don't you?
I might have a copy of that still.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Also, Zombie Dice, if you've never played Zombie Dice. I've got Zombie Dice, and we play that all the time. So Steve Jackson Games has been around a long time, and what they're great about is, yes, I love the big Fantasy Flight broad games, but Steve Jackson Games, they like to get stuff out that's fairly easy to understand, but as you said, hard to master. And it's cheaper. You know, a set of Munchkin is not that expensive, and you can build multiple sets over time by just adding things to it. The same with Ogre. Ogre wasn't that expensive when it came out. Now, Illuminati now is, but it's because there's, 700-800 cards in that game now. So, but again, for a game that you're going to play multiple times, it's not as expensive as, say, the Axis and Allies 1911 edition, where you're playing World War I, or the 1914 edition, where you've got to play. You got to pay somewhere upwards of $100. Steve Jackson's most expensive games probably $35, so they're inexpensive and fun to play. I love the humor behind Steve Jackson and a lot of the stuff he's done. And I know we've discussed GURPS, but that's a lot of fun too. Now, it is hard to roll up a character in GURPS, but once you get the character going, the gameplay is pretty rapid.
Right.
It leads to role playing.
The Car Wars game was actually called Auto Duel.
Auto Duel.
Yeah. Yeah, it was on the Atari 8-bit family, Commodore 64, Apple II, Macintosh, and DOS.
Nice.
Yeah, released in '87.
And it was basically a Car Wars game.
Yeah.
Yeah, straight up.
Yeah, you went from town to town, and you geared up your car, took it to dual fights, so on and so forth. Take it to salvage, get new cars, so on and so forth. It was a cool game.
A lot of the stuff that Steve Jackson did was just amazing. Some of the artwork is really, really complex, and some of it is very cartoonish, especially with Munchkin. It reminds me of the early Magic the Gathering stuff. You'd have something that's really funny and cartoonish, and something that's really, really lifelike, in the same game. You get that a lot with Steve Jackson. And I want to say a lot of fun. I just want to make sure that yes, I do have a YouTube link to the tabletop episode, Will Wheaton's Tabletop, where he played Munchkin with Steve Jackson.
Nice.
I also gave us the link to everything that Steve Jackson Games has ever produced. So the actual link is there, so you can go straight to it. the Steve Jackson game page on Board Game Geek and the Steve Jackson online store, as well as the link to their website. Their online store is called Warehouse 23, which I think is cute. But that's basically it for Steve Jackson games. I know it wasn't a lot, but we covered a lot with the GURPS. So I just kind of wanted to talk about Steve Jackson games in general because I think more people need to get out there and check it out.
Well, and I mean, if you want a really funny time, play Munchkin.
Oh, goodness gracious, yes.
Munchkin is hysterical. All the various iterations of Munchkin are just a blast, and it's a card game. As you said, it's not expensive. It's easy to learn.
Oh yeah. It's easy to learn, and it's a lot of fun, and it's a good game to play and kind of screw your friends over at the same time while you're playing.
Yeah, because that's pretty much what it's about.
Yeah, it's what we used to refer to as a dick me, fuck me game.
Yeah.
So yeah, kids, get out there and play some Steve Jackson games. Check out the links. Look at some of the pictures. You're going to love it. Especially Illuminati. If you were into humor about, I don't want to say government agencies, but large conglomerates and things like that. If puns on those things you find humorous, you're going to love Illuminati because it's all one big joke.
I honestly can't think of anything that I've played Steve Jackson that has not been just a blast to play.
Yeah,
I mean,
all
the games are great.
Yeah, and most of the time they're fast too. That's another thing. Well, except for the role playing games, of course, the times, but the board games and the card games are usually quick plays.
Which is really why I was thinking Mag Blast was a part of that, because it's Mag Blast is so similar to Car Wars, the Car Wars card game.
Yes, and we have played Car Wars card games with as many as 10 people sitting at a table, and as few as 3 or 4 people. I can remember one Car Wars game in particular where we had 10 people sitting around a table, and one guy mouthed off. So he was the last person to go. So the first person who went took a shot at him, and then the next person took a shot at him, and then the next person took a shot at him.
Oh yeah, it's
the dude never got to play.
No, it's putting a target on your back.
Yeah, he doesn't have armor on his left side. Yeah, it's a common reference when you're playing that game is, I smell blood in the water.
Yeah, putting a target on somebody's back is just yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun. So the Car Wars card game, which I believe is in its 5th iteration at this point. It's the same game. They just keep republishing it.
Right.
And redoing the rules. Now, I know there's 2 ways to play it. There's the way you play it where you can only take 1 shot with a gun, with a shot. And then there's a free-for-all where you could take as many shots as you have bullets for. I like both versions. I think I prefer taking as many shots as you want, but that game ends pretty quickly.
Yeah, I was going to say I'd stay with the single shot one. It kind of makes the game go a little bit longer.
Yes, and you can spin or swerve to avoid a fight, but keep in mind if you do that, there is a counter to that called Skid into the Wall, which is my favorite card in the whole game.
Well, doing some of those kind of dangerous spins too can cause damage to your vehicle, damage to your armor,
to your tires. Yeah, you can't swerve if you take 9 points of damage on your tires.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. So my favorite is Skid into the Wall. But what's really sad is if you swerve and you hit Skid into the Wall, not only do you take the damage, but you still take the damage points on your tires.
Right.
Love that card. So yeah, get out there, play Steve Jackson games. Give love to Steve Jackson because they could use it.
Cool. Awesome. Good stuff with Steve Jackson games.
Thank you, sir.
With that, we'll step over to the murdery side of the house.
Murder.
For today, I got my information off All That's Interesting, an online psychology degree guide, Wikipedia, and Crime Museum, and this is the story of Albert Fish, the Brooklyn Vampire. Albert
Fish, the Brooklyn Vampire. Seems like I've heard this before.
Well, it's an old one. We start off in November of 1934, and 10-year-old Grace Budd has been missing for 6 years. There have been no promising clues or developments regarding her disappearance, that is, until her mother, Delia Flanagan Budd, received an anonymous letter. It read, quote, "Dear Mrs. Budd, on Sunday, June the 3rd, 1928, I called you at 406 West 15th Street. Brought you pot cheese, strawberries. We had lunch. Grace sat in my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her."
What?
So this bizarre rambling letter that Miss Budd received on that cold November evening began with the tale of a deckhand who developed a taste for human flesh and ended with the harrowing description of Mrs. Budd's daughter being murdered and roasted in the oven. Although the written confession was unsigned and nameless, it was the beginning of the end for the cannibalistic serial killer Albert Fish. How his exorbitant madness and murderous bloodlust came to be, however, is a tale as macabre and unimaginable as the death of Grace Budd itself. So, born on May 19th, 1870 in Washington, D.C. to Randall and Ellen Fish, Hamilton Howard Albert Fish had many names. So when a serial killer is dubbed the Brooklyn Vampire, the Moon Maniac, the Werewolf of Wisteria, the Gray Man, and the Boogeyman, it's almost certain he is thoroughly deranged.
Right on.
Fish once boasted that he had children in every state, and at one time stated his number of victims was about 100. However, it's not known whether he was referring to rapes or cannibalism, nor is it known if his statement was truthful. He was small, quiet, and unassuming, and he had a face that blended in with the crowd and a private life that would have frightened even the most hardened criminals. As a child, Fish was plagued by mental illness, as were a number of his family members. Not only was his brother in an asylum, but his uncle had been diagnosed with mania, while his mother routinely experienced visual hallucinations. His father was 75 years old at the time of Fish's birth and died when Albert was just 5 years old. His widowed mother didn't have the resources to care for Albert and his 3 siblings alone and left them with a state orphanage, and it was there that he conceived a passion for pain. The caretakers at the orphanage regularly beat the children and even encouraged the children to hurt each other. But while the other children lived in fear of painful punishments, Fish reveled in them. He later recalled, quote, "I was there till nearly 9, and that's where I got started wrong. We were unmercifully whipped. I saw boys doing many things that they should not have done." He came to enjoy and associate the pain with pleasure, which would later seep into sexual gratification. When his mother became mentally stable and financially self-sufficient enough to take him home in 1880, she removed him from the orphanage, but the damage had already been done.
Yeah, it sounds like they were trying to build a factory to produce serial killers.
One would think based on what we know now.
Yes.
Yes. Fish not only continued to administer his own beatings, but began an unhealthy relationship with the telegraph boy in 1882. The child introduced him to the sexual practice of urolagnia and coprophagia, the consumption of human waste. Yeah. Eventually, his sadomasochistic tendencies led him to an obsession with sexual self-mutilation. He would regularly embed needles into his groin and abdomen and flog himself with a nail-studded paddle. He's not quite right in the head.
Yeah, okay.
In 1890, after a 20-year-old Fish moved to New York City, his crimes against children began. He became increasingly curious about the pain of others and wasted no time after moving to New York City to learn more. He started prostituting himself and molesting young boys whom he'd lure from their home to rape and torture them, and a nail-studded paddle was his favorite weapon. Remarkably, in 1898, Fish married a woman his mother had introduced him to and fathered 6 children with her. And while he never violently abused his own, Fish continued raping and torturing other children throughout their childhood. Throughout 1898, Fish worked as a house painter. He said he continued molesting children, mostly boys younger than age 6. He later recounted in an incident in which a male lover took him to a waxworks museum where Fish was fascinated by a bisection of a penis. After that, he became obsessed with sexual mutilation. In 1903, he was arrested for grand larceny, convicted, and incarcerated in Sing Sing. He'd be released by 1910 and began again working as a house painter in Delaware, and this is where Fish met Thomas Kedden. Fish and Kedden began a sadomasochistic relationship, although it is unknown how much of it Kedden actually consented to.
In later descriptions of the affair, Fish would hint that Kedden was perhaps intellectually disabled, although it was always difficult to sort fact from fiction in Fish's tales. Only 10 days after their initial meeting, Fish lured Kedden to an abandoned farmhouse under the pretense of a tryst. When Kedden arrived, however, he found himself locked inside, and for 2 weeks, Fish tortured Kedden. The budding killer mutilated the other man's body and cut off half his penis. Then as suddenly as he arrived, Fish disappeared, leaving Kedden with a $10 bill for his trouble. Fish later recalled, "I shall never forget his scream or the look that he gave me."
He cut off half of his penis.
And then gave him a $10 bill and left.
Huh. Okay, I'm with you.
By 1917, Fish was having difficulty concealing the symptom of severe mental illness, leading his wife to leave him for another man. Fish's wife left him for John Straub, a handyman who boarded with the Fish family. Fish then had to raise his children as a single parent. After his arrest, Fish told a newspaper that when his wife left him, she took nearly every possession the family owned. His self-harm grew thereafter, from pressing more and more needles into his groin to stuffing... This one got me. To stuffing wool covered in lighter fluid into his anus and then setting it on fire.
So he made himself a human firecracker? Okay.
After his arrest, x-rays would reveal that Fish had at least 29 needles lodged in his pelvic region. He began having auditory hallucinations as well. At one point, he recalled wrapping himself in a carpet on the instructions of John the Apostle. He began teaching his own children strange and oddly sadomasochistic games before developing an obsession with cannibalism. While Fish was never thought to have physically attacked or abused his own children, he did encourage them and their friends to paddle his buttocks with the same nail-studded paddle he used to abuse himself. And as a precursor to consuming human flesh, he began to eat raw meat, meals he often invited his children to share. By 1919, his obsession with torture and cannibalism had brought him to contemplate murder. He began looking for vulnerable children, such as intellectually disabled orphans or homeless black children, usually assumed wouldn't be missed. Fish would later claim to have occasionally paid boys to procure other children for him. Fish tortured, mutilated, and murdered young children with his implements of hell: a meat cleaver, a butcher knife, and a small handsaw. He would claim at his trial and later writings that God was speaking to him, commanding him to torture and consume young children. He scoured advertisements in local papers put out by families looking for someone to perform housework or by young men looking for work themselves, and it was through one of these advertisements that he found young Grace Budd. Grace wasn't always Fish's initial intended target. It was actually her older brother that he had set his sights on. Edward Budd was looking for work on a farm or in the country, and that's why he put in the ad that Fish encountered. Fish originally planned on hiring Edward and bringing him out to his country house to torture him. Thus, under the false name Frank Howard, Fish called on the Budd family in their Manhattan home. He claimed to have some farm work upstate that needed doing, and he was also looking for some help around the house. He stated he would like to have Edward come to work for him at his farm, telling the story of his 6 children and how his wife left him, and was Edward interested. Edward was inclined to take the job from the unremarkable grave-faced gentleman, and he was looking forward to having a job and providing for his family, and Howard even offered a job to Edward's friend Willie. Howard planned to come pick them up a few days later and take them back to his farm to begin work, but when he didn't show, he provided a handwritten note explaining that he would be in touch in a few days, and he came over for a visit the following morning, and the family invited him to stay for lunch. But this is where Fish's interest suddenly shifted. While Edward was mulling over his offer, Fish noticed a young girl standing behind her parents, 10-year-old Grace. He had a new plan, and he didn't waste any time. While discussing his fictitious farm and the imaginary work Edward would undertake, Fish casually mentioned he was in town to visit his niece and attend her birthday party, and asked if little Grace would like to join him. Albert Fish, the unassuming-looking stranger, convinced Delia and Albert Budd to let him take their daughter along to the niece's birthday party, and they would never see her again.
Ugh.
Fish took Grace, dressed in her Sunday best, to his house upstate, the same one he intended to use as a torture chamber for her brother, and according to the letter sent to Delia Budd along with his confession, Fish hid in an upstairs bedroom naked so as not to get blood on his clothing while Grace picked wildflowers in the yard. Fish then called her inside, and she screamed at the sight of him, but he grabbed her before she could run. As his gruesome letter read, quote, "First I stripped her naked. How did she kick, bite, and scratch? I choked her to death and cut her in small pieces so I could take the meat to my rooms, cook, and eat it. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body." The letter, which had clearly been intended to cause panic within the Budd home, hastened Albert Fish's downfall. The paper he had written the letter on happened to be a piece of stationery from the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. Police inquired within the company and found that the paper had been left behind by a janitor from the company at a rooming house he'd been staying at, the same rooming house a man named Albert Fish was renting a place.
Oh.
Upon learning that Fish bore a strong resemblance to Frank Howard, Grace Budd's kidnapper, the police set up an interview. And to their surprise, Fish confessed in an instant, practically tripping over himself to reveal the precise details of what he had done to Grace Budd, as well as dozens of other children. But in the end, only 3 children, including Grace, could be concretely proven to be his victims. So he's a lot like the one we discussed last week, that as soon as police got to him, he just, I did it. Here it is.
Here's what I did. Here's what I did with these other kids. But it also sounds like he's so crazy, he's not really sure what is real and what is not.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Oh, I got this other kid over here and did this and this. But there is no other kid, you know?
Well, Grace's was by far the most infamous of his crimes, but his other murders were linked to him after the arrest, and surprisingly, they're just as gruesome. According to Crime Museum, Albert Fish is believed to be responsible for the murder of a 4-year-old boy named Billy Gaffney. Billy had disappeared while playing with a neighbor in Brooklyn on February 11, 1927. The child would later tell police that the boogeyman took Billy. The 3-year-old boy described this boogeyman as a slender elderly man with gray hair and a gray mustache, but at first cops didn't take the child seriously. But when they searched all over the neighborhood with no clues, they finally realized he had been abducted and he was never seen again. After Fish's arrest, a motorman on a Brooklyn trolley line came forward to identify him as a nervous old man that he saw on the same day Billy disappeared. Apparently, the old man was trying to quiet a little boy sitting next to him on the trolley who was crying out for his mother, and the man then dragged the little boy off the trolley. Fish admitted to the kidnapping and murder of Billy in sickening detail, quote, "I took tools, a good heavy cat of 9 tails, homemade, short handle, cut one of my belts in half, slit these halves in 6 strips about 8 inches long. I whipped his bare behind until the blood ran from his legs. I cut off his ears, nose, slit his mouth from ear to ear, gouged out his eyes. He was dead by then. I stuck the knife in his belly and held my mouth to his body and drank his blood." Although no one was able to ever find Billy's remains, people were able to locate the body of Fish's 3rd confirmed victim relatively quickly. In 1924, a young boy named Francis McDonald vanished while playing with his brother and a group of friends on Staten Island. His body was found in the woods shortly after. He had been strangled by his own suspenders hanging by a tree near Francis's home. McDonald's friends told police that he was taken by an elderly man with a gray mustache. A neighbor also told police he observed the boy with a similar-looking man walking along a grassy path into the nearby woods. Francis's mother, Anna, said that she saw the same man earlier that day. She told reporters, quote, "He came shuffling down the street, mumbling to himself and making queer motions with his hands. I saw his thick gray hair and his drooping gray mustache. Everything about him seemed faded and gray." Shortly before Albert Fish was put to death, he confessed to being the one who lured Francis into the woods, later assaulting and strangling him. He admitted that he was ready to dismember the boy, but he thought he heard someone approaching and fled the scene. The trial of Albert Fish began on March 11, 1935, and demonstrated quite clearly that the man was insane. Many confessions and testimonies were heard by law enforcement and psychiatrists. Mr. Fish described how he wanted to lure Edward Budd and his friend Willie to the farm to kill them. However, once he laid his eyes on Gracie, he changed his mind and desperately wanted to kill her. He took Gracie to the train station and purchased a one-way ticket for her. And after the ride to the countryside, he took her to a house, and we know the story from there. He discussed the details of the murder of Billy Gaffney, describing how he tied him up and beat him. He even admitted to drinking his blood and making a stew out of his body parts. His attitude was not like those of people with psychosis. He was calm and reserved, which was out of the ordinary. He confessed that he wanted to inflict pain and have pain inflicted on him, and he taunted and preyed on children, mostly boys. As expected, his defense pleaded innocent by reason of insanity. Fish did admit that his auditory hallucinations in the form of voices had told him to kill children. And despite numerous psychiatrists involved in the trial supporting the insanity plea, the jury found Fish sane enough to be found guilty. The trial only took 10 days and ended with a verdict that saw Fish executed by electrocution the following year. While awaiting his fate behind bars in Sing Sing prison, Fish was permitted to write a series of notes regarding his crimes. These would help reporters covering the gruesome crimes more properly detail his crimes with a first-hand account, sure to entice readers. While it's generally believed he killed anywhere between 3 and 9 victims, Fish himself had another figure in mind. His chilling claim is that he had a child in every state remains unconfirmed. Meanwhile, the man's detailed recollections from prison have never been released. Before his execution on January 16, 1936, Albert Fish's attorney, Jack Dempsey, refused to share his client's notes. It only took one glance at them to determine what Fish had described was too macabre for public consumption. He said, quote, "I will never show it to anyone. It was the most filthy string of obscenities that I have ever read." And that is the story of Albert Fish.
That sounds awful.
Yeah, this was a pretty bad dude.
Well, okay, but he said he killed a child in every state.
He said he had a child in every state, and I read that both ways. Did he mean he had children of his own from every state, or that he had killed a child in every state? I kind of went back and forth on that, which one it is, and I think you're right. I think he was claiming that he had killed a child in every state.
Yeah, and I don't. From the way that story read out, I don't think he could have. You know what I mean? Like, he wasn't in every state.
No, but I mean,
who knows? Yeah,
who knows? I mean, he started his crimes in 1890, and and
they got him in 1935. So
yeah, or 1934, 1935. Yeah. So who knows? Who knows? I mean, it wasn't the digital age. It wasn't the age of information, and they might not have connected him throughout different murders throughout the country.
Yeah.
Who knows? Just yet another bad dude that we cover.
Another bad dude.
Yep.
Well, we had a good dude and a bad dude. We had Steve Jackson and
this awful man.
This awful Fish.
Right. Albert Fish. Well, so this was a short week, but I think it was a good week of information that we covered. As always, you can find our information on nerderyandmurdery.com, where you can find the links to our social media as well as information how to contact us. Also find links to everything we talked about, plus pictures. So please do go check out our website for that. If you contact us and let us know things you want to hear, things you don't want to hear, we're always happy to listen to everything you've asked.
Yes.
We've had episodes that we've covered on request from listeners, so please do let us know. You can also find the link to our merchandise on our website, where if you want to display your Nerdery and Murdery fandom, please do check that out. And you can find the link to our Patreon, where our patrons get not only episodes early, but they get exclusive episodes. Just for our patrons, we do give information on our website about our patron exclusive, but the actual episode itself, you do have to become a patron in order to hear those.
Please and thank you.
Please and thank you. So that takes us to the end of another recording week, and with that,
I have been Zig with your Nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your Murdery.
Cue the music.